We were not the signatories of the refugee convention. So Pakistan, but still kept receiving refugees from Afghanistan, other borders, not just beghari. It's not just homelessness. It is also leaving your everything between climate and conflict. So the climate displaced community, when it comes to big cities or other cities, so they face threats and the conflict arises in those communities. The cattle farmers, and now we do not have the cattle farmers. So there's big chunk of those people are now working in service industry. So there's now food insecurity, which is growing at the same time.
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where I put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. Today, to join me and speak on one of the pressing issues that the humanity and Pakistan is facing is the issue of people who have been displaced by conflict as well as climate change. She's a communications specialist, but at the same time, she's working on this project, and this issue remains to be very close to her heart. I have with me today the founder of the Displacement project, Maria Patel. Welcome to InferTalks.
Thank you for inviting me here.
All right, Maria, let's go ahead and start our conversation. And the very first thing that I want to sort of ask you is as you went along working on your project by mapping different communities that have actually been affected both by climate change and conflict as well, what is it that you really found after interacting with these people? Accounts that often get lost to the policymakers as they design their approaches or interventions or their policies to help solve some of the issues that are actually faced by communities that are actually facing the brunt right on the ground. What is it that you really found that seems to get missing in the larger conversation?
So thank you, Usama, for inviting me at InferTalks, and it's a great platform to highlight such issues. I'm glad that I will get a chance to talk about this. So basically, displacement is one of those issues which is it's a black hole. If you have seen Pakistan's making, so it started off with we have gotten migrants and refugees, and still we were not the signatories of the refugee convention. So Pakistan, but still kept receiving refugees from Afghanistan and other borders, and we have had a huge crisis of the sorts. But then, there have been events which were natural calamities or even some conflicts which triggered people getting displaced or they had to leave their abode and move to another part of the country or across the globe. We have seen this trend, and we acknowledge that war triggers or the conflict triggers such scenarios in which people have to move across borders. That's called cross-border migration or displacement or asylum seeking. So that's very common terminologies. So what happened was displacement, the idea of displacement that, beghari in common, very commonly known in Urdu as beghari, but in beghari sounds very temporary. However, displacement is a very deeper conversation, and it is not just it's not just beghari. It's not just homelessness. It is also leaving your everything and whatever your connection to the soil, your belongingness, your belongings. And and sometimes in displacement, you also sort of disconnect with your relationships. So in 2010 floods, we have seen a lot of people leaving their homes, moving to other cities. And then in those new cities where they moved, they have also faced a lot of tensions faced a lot of violence from the host communities. So these were the things I'm from Karachi. So in Karachi, there's a lot of ethnic conversation. First we have seen the migrants from Pashtun areas. Now we have gotten Saraikis, and now there are so many Sindhis taking over the city. So all these ethnic conversations were going around me, and that was why are we alienating? Why are we putting people in pockets? So that was one of the reasons behind this research initially. And then I started digging into it, that where is the government's role? What is government providing them? Where is the governance? What's the governance issue here? Is there any law which exists on it? How does the police protect them? What is their rights are their rights protected by host communities? What kind of hostilities they face in such scenarios? So these were the things which actually I started putting down. But then it needed some sort of bigger umbrella and streamlining of those such thoughts which were spread all over the place. So I started jotting them down, and I started mapping them. I started looking into the issues, for instance, that okay, if the conflict happens, so what sort of conflicts? In one conflict, how many other conflicts, what sorts of conflicts exist? I will give you an example. At the displacement.com, this platform, what we did was we mapped conflicts. And we mapped conflicts into 3 categories, which was intra-urban conflict. Intra-urban conflict is something like, for instance, Jaranwala, or Leari, which we have seen, or here Meherabadi, Rimsha colony. So there have been sectarian violence which triggers such kind of displacement, that people have to move overnight to another safe place, or they go into some unknown places to for the protection. And so that's called intra-urban conflict. The second conflict was we have seen Zarbe Azab. We are war on terror. There have been internally displaced people. So internal displacement, we call it. Internally displaced persons we have received because of military operations. The third, or even floods for that matter. So, but that is a climate displacement. We would not call it conflict displacement. And then the third form was the cross-border displacement. The cross-border displacement was Afghan refugees, which were after 2021 fall of Kabul. So it has to be identified as a conflict, not as a war itself, because what happened was that there was the war was ending. And those people who were very active during that war, who were an asset, they built their life around it. They were middle class, educated people, very resourceful. They were left in shambles, and they had life-threatening situation over there. So they had to move. They had to cross the border. So that's called cross-border displacement. So this is what we did in the conflict. In the climate, what we did was that the suddenness of the event, anything which triggers. It's not like the slow onset of droughts. It's not climate. We don't call it climate displacement because you still have a chance. So displacement actually is a suddenness, is caused by any suddenness of the event. So in drought, you still have time to think about what places you can go to, from where you can come back or not, or where you can what places can give you protection. So you have time. But when floods happen or earthquake happens, things or GLOF happens, so you do not have time. And you have to decide on a whim that wherever the government is taking you, or wherever you're patronage, you take some sort of patronage, or
or most importantly, would you even get a chance to escape that situation in the first place?
Yeah, sometimes it's you're stuck in that, and you're waiting for some
some help to arrive.
Some help, and so that's called that's called climate displacement, and that's different from the
conflict-induced displacement.
But there is an overlap between climate and conflict. So the climate displaced community, when it comes to big cities or other cities, so they face threats, and the conflict arises in those communities because they feel that okay, the resource sharing is going to be increasing. And somebody else from outside is coming into their communities, and they probably are coming with no expectations. So they will be the cheaper labor. They will offer the cheap labor. So they will offer their services for lesser amount of money. So they feel very threatened. The host communities often feel very threatened by these communities who are displaced.
Communities, yeah.
And that's where the conflict arises. Sometimes that kind of conflict arises. Sometimes it's religious as well. And sometimes like governance issues in those areas also arises. So yeah, that's what I tried to do, looked into at the displacement.com.
So if I can sort of, phrase it differently. So it's more about sort of humanizing that very plight that people actually experience as a consequence of both conflict and climate-induced displacement to these different set of people that have to leave their homes behind and settle in different areas. That's the very same thing, that you're trying to do with your work.
Yeah, actually, as at the displacement.com, there was a lot of need to actually listen to their stories, first thing first.
Right.
So first, we gathered those first-hand accounts through audio stories and photo stories. And also we tried to map those communities.
And again, I'm sort of trying to, stop you in your tracks. What value are you trying to add to policy conversations over here? I mean, what is it that usually policymakers usually miss out on when they're trying to come up with policy interventions to help address the issues that are, faced by these very set of people that we're talking about?
So what happens is first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that they are displaced communities. So, I will give you with an example, because otherwise I feel that I'm not from academia, okay?
Right.
And I don't want it to be an academic talk.
Right.
Okay, so I will tell you from a very layman's perspective, and because I really want it for everybody else to understand that what the problem is. So the issue is that those people who have gotten displaced in 2010, they live in one area. They are 154,000. They just got the census done in Karachi, and they are living at on a 12 kilometers belt, and they are 154,000 people, which means that they are 1/3. They make 1/3 of the national constituency. National constituency size is 450,000, right? Around 450,000. So 154,000 is 1/3 of that, which means they should have a say. They are displaced. They are from different parts of Sindh, and they moved to this area after the floods happened in 2010. They got a patronage. They have gotten they have gotten support and community and all of that, but they often get into the conflict with another community which migrated in late 80s. Which
Right.
community is that? Which is a Pashtun community, because they live near Al Asif Square.
Right.
So they often get into the Sindhi community often gets into the conflict with the Pashtun community. On what? On who is going to work at the sabzi mandi,
Right.
like the vegetable market, the main vegetable market, which is across the road, and they share the labor there. And so for 500 rupees, they often get into entangled with each other, and there's no for what? Oh, you are so they use this term, oh, you are a Hindu, you are coming to our vegetable market, you are polluting our land, our business, and oh, we don't want to work with you, and we don't want to see your face with the break of the dawn. So these kind of things are happening. So when any event happens which triggers the displacement, it doesn't look at what religion you are from, what ethnicity you are from, how rich or poor you are. So it doesn't look at you or affect you because of these things. So when this happens, these kind of events happen, so there is a larger problem which is brewing, which is they happened in 2010. The government did not try to send them back, or why did they 154,000 is a very substantial number.
Yeah.
It's not a small number. Why have they not moved back to their areas? What was it was a land acquisition issue. They were the farmers. So there's there's an intersectionality of issues. For instance, because of them moving here, which means there are no more people growing food.
Yeah.
back there.
Yeah.
Agriculture has a shortage now, or livestock, the cattle farmers, and now we do not have the cattle farmers. So there's big chunk of those people are now working in service industry. So there's now food insecurity, which is growing at the same time for us, for other people, and government is not looking at it from that perspective. When government tried to send them back after water drained out, or telling them, they what strategy did they use, and why did they not successfully send them back? What was the issue? So the displacement.com tried to look into that what kind of things these people ask for. For instance, if they ask for a piece of land where they can grow food without the intervention of their the feudal lords whose land they were working on, and because there was a strange kind of issues. For instance, they were growing food, the flood happened, they took some loans from their zamindar, and they're that zamindar is now asking to give that money back, which was drowned in those floods. So
Right.
where will they give them the money? So as a compensation, now they're in debt for them. So that's the fear of being in debt there, or not getting anything except for life threatening situation there. They do not want to go back.
Mm-hmm.
So they prefer being here, which is it's a big city. They live in the unknown. They are not there are so many people, millions of people. They could be one of them. And where would they come and look for them? The other person who's 5,000 rupees loan, they are in debt for 5,000 rupees, 50,000 rupees maximum, not more. And because of that reason, they cannot go back. Now these issues, those communities do not understand, or are not willing to address.
And nor do policymakers.
Policymakers do not And now here's also a media blackout on it.
Right.
So, for instance, media chases these stories in the beginning.
Yeah.
When the event happens, for 6 months, they will keep talking about it. 30 million people have been displaced in 2022 floods. Now,
I'll come to the media part, but before that, I want to sort of focus
it's
on...
because we say that media is a pillar of the society, very fourth pillar of the
And the
society.
state as well,
If it is the fourth pillar of the society, then it's the responsibility is on them to ask policymaker, to ask advocacy, because again, it's about the ratings.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
So it's it's a very complex situation. It gets becomes a dilemma of sorts.
It does.
So for the policymakers, it's okay, it happens now. It will just fade out in coming months, and then we will go on.
Right.
In the climate perspective, when we look at it, so we have been the we were the ones, Sendai, in the Sendai Corporation, 2000. Okay, wait. So DRR, disaster risk reduction, we are the signatories, or we are the recipients of these support from the international community. We get funds from the international community. We are getting funds since the Rio conference in 90s, and we are getting for 30 years. We are getting climate funds.
Yeah.
Pakistan is getting climate funds, but where are we spending those funds? We are spending those funds on GLOF research, which is one of the events, and it is of course triggering that your glaciers are melting, they are going to cause floods, but there's no substantial work on water management, which actually needs to be done in this southern part of the country.
Right.
In the northern parts of the country, GLOF is an important event. We need to take care of those things. But then, there are huge climate events which are happening on the southern parts. For instance, either drought or either floods. So these are the two situations which we are facing continuously.
Right.
So I think the issue is very complex, but there's no dialogue happening. People do not sit and talk at all. So I think that is one of the reasons
that should be given,
Yeah.
considered amount of attention.
Dialogues has to happen.
All right. And now let me sort of come to this very important part, and that is about you. You're someone who does not actually happen to have, a full-time, must I say, that, you did not always have a career, in subjects of policy making or in policy discourse itself. You're someone who's actually worked in the PR business. What really got you interested to actually, put that hat off and put on this new hat, which had more to do with research and generating policy discourses. Where did that shift of heart really come about?
So I was in mainstream advertising industry, and I was working on this tea whitener. And we launched a new identity for the tea whitener. And it was like during that main research where we were like, trying to create a new positioning, which was also like, a regional positioning for that tea whitener, which was a huge thing. Like, as an advertiser, it's a very big thing that, oh my God, that you are actually launching a product and with some positioning, which will also have an international appeal or like, which will take you to places. So we were like, doing this research. We went to this small neighborhood village in Okara. And there we were like, meeting people, and we found out that the locals, the daily wage which they had was only 150 rupees. Daily wage was 150 rupees. And that product which we were launching, so it was for like, 7 rupees. And that was only serving 4 people of the household. So, and that basically it was a tea whitener. So in our house, in our society, tea is like, basic, it's a necessity. It is not something like, it's not a luxury. And people say, if nothing, like we will at least drink tea, like tea is like, key to us. So when I calculated that, all of that, and like, I realized that each household at least has 6 to 8 people in Pakistan. And if that household, which has a daily income of 150 rupees, and they are paying like, 7 into like, for one time tea, they are paying 14 rupees. And for 2 times, the tea for twice a day is costing them 28 rupees, which means that at least 20% of their daily income is going into only tea whitening, not even like, tea making. So that actually like hit me that the corporate sector is like really leeching upon us and it's not like really serving us. So that's from there I actually had a shift, and I thought like, why do our policy makers not think about these things, or like, why there's no policy or regulatory body on like, the pricing. So that started from that thing, and I thought I will not get into like, I will not work in advertising industry ever again, and I did not actually. So from there, I moved to working on the communications for the development sector, different development sector organizations, including USAID, UNDP, World Bank, like all of them. I worked on USIP even. So I worked with all of them, and I learned that, okay, the social issues are like, on multilateral, and they are like, on different levels. And I learned about advocacy. And from advocacy, I wanted to work on the think tanks as a think tank. So to shape up a think tank, I thought, okay, then I will have to do a research, but it's a very mundane talk, and I'm not interested in indulging in it, I think.
And then so finally, with this turn of heart, you were able to take your first steps towards the establishment of the displacement itself. And this very project,
I have done a lot of researches.
Of
no, actually, basically, I don't know if I should be indulging in this question a lot or not, but I have done a lot of researches in the past. And one of the researches, for instance, like basically I'm in advertising from the strategy segment. So in a strategy, you have to do the research. Mm-hmm. You have to go on field. You have to understand your audience. You have to know about your audience. What do they do? Where are they? Like, what is their lifestyle? Who are they serving? And what is serving them?
Yeah.
So it's like about understanding the people. So it like there was like a lot of connection between my work and that work as well. And in PR, as you say, it's not PR. It was not public relations. It was purely advertising, a strategy. So based on that, like, I started making communication strategy for other sectors. for the development sector, or for the government even, the communication strategy on different levels. And for that, I had to dig into the issues of the society. So when I started digging into, and I remember I wrote first 14 points policy recommendation for on Zenab alert. And that was how that app should work, and what are the problems in it, what can be done better, how we can include it on its outreach for the people, because the issue is very close to most of us. Zenab alert was basically, we all of us know about it. So that's where the journey began, actually, on policy. That I thought, I was writing it as in a laymanish way, that, okay, this is missing, this can be included. But I realized that the nuances I understand, many people do not understand or look into. So one of the reasons, why I had this shift was that.
Right. And now, so speaking about it, when did you sort of start with the displacement itself? I mean, the portal.
So in 2019, I was a research assistant on one of the projects, which was sort of understanding the communities who have come to Karachi, gotten displaced, and then have gotten further displaced, or have threats to get displaced. So I was a research assistant on that project, and I realized that it wasn't looking into the terminologies properly, and it did not use the term displacement as well. So it was looking into migration and refugees and displacement, and overlooking, which is also a part of the problem in our larger discourse, that we do not simplify it. We need to in our literature, we need to identify the terminology. We have to we have to have a correct use of the terminologies, so that we will give them their rights. So otherwise, it is a very problematic issue when you use migration as interchangeably with displacement, and or refugees interchangeably with migrant community. It's you are lost in translation.
Exactly, it's likely to have different connotations.
Yeah. So I thought that that research is good.
Yeah.
That research is asking the right questions, but is not putting not answering it correctly.
Yeah.
So that's from where my journey started on displacement. Then I went to, when I was working on the Karachi Beach Radio, I was meeting these communities who are fishermen, or who are living along the coastal line of Karachi, and it was their study of the commons, and they come here from somewhere else. And now, because their income or their source of income is threatened because of the climate change, they are now thinking of moving somewhere else again. And there's a loss of work.
Yeah. So they've become permanent nomads, and I mean, they cannot actually stay at one place and make a life. They have to be on a permanent go.
And this is not about nomads. It's also,
I'm just trying to put it in
I feel that there's a problem here. That we are not losing just the people who are into some form of. It's not their loss. It's our loss as well, because they come, or they have a lot of indigenous knowledge of the sea, or of their how the sea is changing.
Yeah.
And what is the right way to do fishing, for instance. And we are losing that indigenous knowledge and to the corporate culture, and we are getting into trawling, fishing through mechanical ways, which has a lot of impact on the environment and on the climate as well. So we are actually losing that. It's purely our loss. It's not their loss. So that's what I feel. Whenever something happens, some event happens, this is with what triggers. So basically, these people who get displaced, they also lose a lot of. The society loses a lot of indigenous knowledge with them. Right. So those people, those farmers who have been gotten displaced because of floods, they are settling into some sort of labor market.
Yeah.
But we are losing. The agriculture is losing the true farmers,
Because
who
of this-
understands the land,
Yeah.
who understands how much water needs to be given, what kind of crop has to be come in the season. Okay, if the weather is changing, then what should be done, what should not be done. So we are losing that kind of knowledge, with these displaced communities, or by not.
All right, now sort of moving on, if you could sort of provide me with a very brief response in terms of, you've touched on many other complex angles, like what are certain factors that actually keep people from going back to their areas. But apart from that, what are certain responsibilities on part of the government that it sort of needs to get done in order to make sure that those very communities that are affected by climate change can go back and resettle in their very native lands?
So recently, Sindh government has started this after 2022 floods. So 2.4 million houses has been damaged. Great part on the government that they have identified the damage and they have identified a solution for it, that they are rebuilding those houses. They are committed to rebuild those houses under the program. Just give me a second on this. Kya tha? Sindh People's Housing Project. Yeah. So they, under the People's Housing Project, they have they are rebuilding those houses. They have identified a perfect solution for it. That, once you give them the house or home, their home, they will be motivated to go back to their lands. So I think that is one thing which was missing earlier. And, sustainable housing was the key, which can survive the weather or the climate change. So they are offering that to them. It's a great, initiative by the government. Also, the one thing which is really amazing about this project is that they are giving it to women. So gender is included in it. They are not giving it to men. The money is not transferred. So the women has to make their accounts. And they become the leader of the household. So that's a really great shift. I see it as a great shift. And it's really if it succeeds, then definitely it's one of the biggest milestones.
I'm sure, plenty of people from outside of Pakistan are also, listening to this very podcast. Why do you think that might be an important thing to do, to sort of, deposit the money in women's account and not men's account? Why is that?
Basically, men comes up with these things. Okay, I lost my motorbike. I should get a motorbike. Oh, how about I invest in one big buffalo. We can get 2 buffaloes in it. 2 years later, they will give us so much money. They think on those lines. They think if they get the money, they will invest in something else. And so the women and the children's his children suffer. They keep suffering. So when they make women accountable, or so women really takes responsibility of certain things.
And for women, it's all the more important to
protect her children.
And to have a safe space for the family.
Safe space, household, it's very important to understand. So I think that is one of the reasons that it is a very big calculated initiative, and investing on women is investing on the society in the end. And because once you provide a safety to the entire offer a safety to the women, you are offering a safety to the entire household. So that's one thing which I really like about this project.
That's interesting. So now, Maria, what do you really want to see the change, that the kind of work that you're really doing under the banner of the Displacement project itself? What's the kind of impact would you really want to help create?
So basically, these are the communities. They live in communities sector. They move in communities. They move in the form of communities. So it's very easy. Once we talk about community building initiatives, it's very important to engage them and sort of ask them for the initiatives they want for themselves. So this Displacement project was one effort to identify their challenges. They talk about their challenges in it. And like, if you listen to those audio stories, you will hear their grievances. And you will also learn about the governance issues, like what kind of governance issues were there. You will learn about like, how climate is changing and how climate is becoming a bigger factor in all of that. You learn about like, how a climatic event brews conflict. So there are so many things, there are so many layers which you learn about. And then I think by looking into this, we can present a case study for a larger audience, for a bigger audience, and which is not living only in Pakistan. And we can make a success stories out of those things. For instance, like, People's Housing Society, for that matter, we can like replicate this or can transpire this in places which are like affected by climate or which have received displaced communities. I would also like to define displacement. And I would also like the government or policymakers to understand how to address displaced communities, and what can be provided to those communities, or what should be provided to those communities in their time of, where they are not feeling at home, or in the time where they are feeling like, really hopeless or homeless. Once you are homeless, you feel hopeless as well. And you don't see like, you are living by the day and not by like, you are not planning for the future.
Yeah.
You are not like, thinking about what's going to be there in the future. So that's really a limbo which has to end for people, so that like, they invest in the society as well. Once you take the uncertainty out of anybody's life, you are creating the certainty for the society, not just for that person. That's what I believe in.
And on this very note, Maria, I really wish you all the best in terms of, empowering this or creating impact through this very empowered bottom-up approach to bring about policy change, especially for communities that have been affected and have been displaced both by conflict and climate change. Maria, thank you so much for joining us once again on this podcast, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Usama.
Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with Ms. Maria Patel. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content. And if you'd like to stay informed about our upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.